Across the wide open plains of South Africa, where survival and loss exist, shoulder to shoulder, a soft-spoken American ranger stepped into a chapter no one would have believed if they hadn't witnessed it. A narrow streak of blood guided him to a lion caught fast in cruel barbed wire, and the decision to free that animal created a connection that reached far beyond human logic. Yet nothing could have prepared him for what followed, when a towering wildfire advanced, and an entire pride responded in a way the world had never imagined. Morning arrived gently over the undulating hills of the Umpolozi Reserve, laying long ribbons of muted gold across the grass. Ethan Walker guided his aging Land Cruiser along a thin dirt path, the familiar vibration of the engine merging with the quiet whisper of the early breeze. These hours before sunrise held deep meaning for him. Before visitors arrived, before the heat shimmered across the distant horizon, the land felt stripped down and truthful, revealing tracks, scents, and subtle signs that daylight would soon erase. Ethan, once a U.S. Army medic, and now a wildlife ranger, drew in the cool air slowly. After years spent amid emergencies and trauma, he had come here searching for something softer, something that carried purpose. Safeguarding these animals, especially the endangered African lions, had become his new calling, a form of healing he never anticipated, but deeply needed. He reviewed his gear with careful precision. Field dressings, disinfectant fluids, a satellite phone, and the compact medical pack he never went anywhere without. His supervisors often joked that he over-prepared, but Ethan had learned long ago that a handful of seconds could separate life from death. He mentally logged the reports from the previous day. Elephants feeding near the river bend, a small group of zebras beginning an early migration, and troubling notes about illegal snares discovered along the southern fence. The rise in poaching had become deeply concerning, fueled by underground wildlife trafficking and the growing black market demand for lion parts. Conservation groups and anti-poaching units worked relentlessly, yet the criminals constantly adapted. Ethan knew all too well that even a single wire snare or barbed trap could bring down the most powerful predator. Maya Kumalo's voice crackled over the radio, steady but edged with concern. She was among the most seasoned rangers in the reserve, and one of the few who had quickly learned to trust Ethan. "Ethan, are you up yet? I heard something strange late last night near the Eastern Valley. It sounded like a lion, but weak. Not a normal call." He raised the radio. "I'm close to that area. I'll take a look. Could be an injured male or a displaced juvenile." "Be cautious," Maya replied. "If it's wounded, the pride may be close." Ethan allowed himself a brief smile despite the tension. "When am I ever not?" He turned toward the valley, easing the Land Cruiser forward as it rolled across gravel patches and dry grass. Birds burst from thorn trees as he passed, their calls echoing across the open land. The reserve, for all its beauty, carried dangers as real as any battlefield. Territorial elephants, shifting wildfire lines, sudden flash floods. Yet here Ethan felt more grounded than he ever had back home. Nature's raw honesty, unpredictable and unforgiving, brought clarity no therapy session ever managed to provide. As he neared the valley, something in the air made him straighten. The breeze carried a faint metallic odor, sharp and unmistakable. Blood. He slowed to a near stop, letting the engine idle while he studied the ground. At first, nothing appeared wrong. Then he noticed a section of grass pressed flat, another nearby. A dark smear on a stone. Minimal, but enough to signal recent struggle. Ethan stepped out quietly, boots meeting the earth with practiced care. In the growing daylight, more signs revealed themselves. A short drag mark across the sand. Tall grass stalks bent unnaturally. Another faint trace of blood drying in the sun. His pulse quickened. Injured lions rarely traveled far, and wounded males were especially volatile. They endured pain in silence, but when cornered, they fought with desperate ferocity. He advanced cautiously, scanning the hillside. The reserve appeared peaceful, almost misleadingly so. Golden plains rippled in the breeze, insects hummed in the distance. Yet the stillness felt heavy, as if the land itself were holding its breath. One hand hovered near his tranquilizer kit, not to harm, but to protect himself if the animal lashed out. As a ranger, his duty was balance, conservation, and safety, protecting animals while preventing danger to people. It was a role demanding courage, empathy, and rapid judgment, especially during rescues often highlighted by wildlife protection and sustainable tourism organizations. Then a sound cut through the quiet, a muted, strained breath. Ethan froze. It came again, low, broken, the sound of a creature too weak to roar. He followed it deeper into the brush, stepping lightly, easing branches aside with slow, deliberate movements. The air warmed as the sun climbed, casting shifting shadows across the grass. Every instinct sharpened, just as it had during medical emergencies in his military years. Calm thoughts, steady breathing, absolute focus. When he finally pushed aside a dense cluster of shrubs, his heart jolted. There, partially concealed beneath tangled vines and cruel coils of barbed wire, lay a lion, fully grown, massive, barely alive. Its sides rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Blood darkened the golden fur along its shoulders, and the wire had cut so deeply into flesh that a surge of anger flared inside Ethan toward whoever had set the trap. The lion lifted its head, weakly, eyes dull, but not yet defeated. It attempted a growl, but only a fractured rumble escaped. Ethan dropped to one knee, breath catching. "Easy," he murmured, though he knew the animal couldn't truly understand. Still, his voice softened, a habit formed from years of calming frightened people and wounded creatures alike. "I'm here now. I've got you." The lion blinked slowly, gaze unfocused, yet its struggle spoke louder than any roar. Ethan reached for his kit with measured care. His hands, steady from years of trauma response, moved on instinct, as though this moment had been waiting for him all along. And as the wind swept across the plains, carrying dust and the distant scent of acacia trees, Ethan felt the gravity of a moment that would change everything, even if he couldn't yet see how. One truth was already clear. This lion's story was far from finished. The breeze shifted as Ethan knelt beside the injured lion, carrying the faint aroma of dust and sun-heated grass across the valley. For a brief moment, everything seemed suspended in place. The silence, the shallow, uneven breathing of the massive animal, even the steady rhythm of Ethan's own heart. Then he noticed something else. A narrow streak of dried blood extending past the bushes, disappearing deeper into the brush. It told him the lion had fought hard before collapsing here, dragging the merciless barbed wire along with him. Whoever had set the trap hadn't just broken the law. They had condemned this animal to a slow, agonizing end. The realization tightened Ethan's jaw. Illegal poaching networks were growing more aggressive, fueled by the high value of wildlife trafficking, often cited in international conservation reports. But here and now, only one thing mattered: keeping this lion alive. He rose carefully, giving the animal space, and surveyed the surroundings. The sun had climbed higher, revealing more signs of distress etched into the ground. Grass lay flattened. Soil was torn where the lion had fallen and struggled to stand again. Ethan followed the blood trail a few steps to understand the direction the lion had come from, but he didn't venture far. Leaving the animal unattended was too risky. Still, he memorized every detail. If poachers had placed this trap, there could be others hidden nearby, posing danger not only to wildlife, but to people as well. Tourism in reserves like Ufolozi helped fund conservation efforts, and safeguarding the land was just as vital as protecting the animals themselves. Footsteps rustled behind him. Ethan turned to see Maya jogging closer, her dark braids swinging against her shoulder. She slowed as soon as the lion came into view, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock. "Oh no, Ethan, how bad is it?" "Bad enough," he replied quietly. The wires cut deep. He must have struggled for hours. He gestured toward the blood trail. He came from that direction, likely caught in the southern sector. Maya crouched beside him, lowering her voice. "We need to call for backup." "Not yet," Ethan said calmly. "If the Pride is nearby, we don't want to draw attention with more vehicles. Let me assess him first." The lion released a faint, pained rumble, and Maya instinctively leaned back. Ethan didn't move an inch. He stayed grounded, composed. His presence seemed to steady the animal, even if only slightly. He reached slowly for his kit, knowing he would soon need to cut into the wire. But before he could begin, another sound drifted across the valley. Soft at first, then unmistakable. A low growl rolled out from beyond the acacia trees. Maya's fingers tightened around Ethan's arm. That wasn't him. No, Ethan agreed, eyes narrowing toward the shadows. It wasn't. He straightened just enough to peer above the tall grass. At first there was nothing but sunlit brush and distant earth mounds. Then a shape emerged. Muscular, sleek, golden. A lioness. Her head was lowered, her stance rigid. Amber eyes fixed squarely on Ethan. Maya's breath caught. "We need to move." But Ethan didn't step back. He raised a steady hand to stop her. "Wait." Behind the first lioness, another form appeared. A second lioness, younger but equally alert, stepped into the open. They didn't rush forward. They didn't circle. They simply watched. Silent, assessing, protective. Their presence confirmed what Ethan already feared. The wounded male was not alone. He belonged to a pride, and prides guarded their injured with fierce devotion. The lion beside Ethan tried to lift his head toward the females, but his strength failed him. His body sank back into the soil with a low, strained sound. Something changed in the lioness's eyes. They were no longer simply alert. They were concerned. Ethan responded with slow, intentional movements, lifting his empty hands into view before lowering himself beside the injured male again. He didn't raise his voice. He had no intention of challenging their instincts. Instead, he let his actions speak. Carefully, he placed his hand on the lion's forehead, showing the care behind his intent. The lionesses neither retreated nor advanced. They watched, and somehow the tension in the air thinned just enough for Ethan to move. He signaled for Maya to shift to the opposite side, giving him space to work. She nodded, though her hands shook slightly. "Tell me what you need," she whispered. "Just stay calm," Ethan replied quietly. "If we panic, they will too." He picked up the wire cutters, compact and durable, built for emergencies in the field. "I have to remove this before it harms him further." Ethan leaned in, studying the brutal pattern of metal wrapped around the lion's body. It was a crude trap, the kind poachers favored, because it required no skill, only cruelty. The wire had slid beneath the mane, cutting deep into exposed flesh. He started with the outer strand, gripping tightly, twisting, then cutting, careful not to add more pain. The lion jolted sharply. The lionesses growled together. Maya went rigid. Ethan didn't stop. "Easy. Easy now," he murmured. "We're helping you. Easy." His voice stayed low and steady, the same tone he had once used with wounded soldiers when lives hung in the balance. He cut another section of wire, then another. Each metallic snap rang through the valley, heightening the strain, but slowly the lion's breathing began to settle. Then the lionesses stepped forward several paces. Maya froze. I see them, Ethan said calmly, continuing his work. They're not attacking. They're watching. And they were. It struck Ethan that this pride was different. Their behavior was controlled, almost deliberate. Perhaps they sensed the lion's fading strength. Perhaps they understood pain more deeply than humans assumed. Whatever the reason, they held their position, not as hunters, but as protectors. When Ethan finally severed the last embedded strand, the lion collapsed fully onto the ground, freed, but utterly spent. Ethan pressed sterile gauze against the worst wounds, applying antiseptic to guard against infection. He worked fast, but with care, fully aware that every second mattered. The lionesses lowered their heads, not in warning, but in recognition. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle into him. One of those rare, fragile instants when trust crossed an impossible divide. He looked at Maya. We need to step back now. Give him space. They rose slowly and retreated a few steps into the grass. The lion attempted to rise, managing only a slight shift. His breathing was rough but steady. Then his eyes found Ethan. They lingered there, weak, unfocused, yet unmistakably aware. A look that seemed to carve Ethan's image into memory. A silent acknowledgement of the hands that had freed him. Ethan didn't yet know that this moment would echo far beyond this day. But in the quiet pulse of the valley, he sensed it clearly. Something extraordinary had just begun. By now, the morning sun had climbed high enough to spill bright light across the valley, revealing every wound and every smear of dried blood on the lion's battered frame. Ethan slowed his breathing as he knelt beside the massive animal, once more assessing the damage with the practiced focus of someone who had spent years treating injuries under pressure. The barbed wire hadn't merely wrapped around the lion's body. It had cut deeply, threading beneath the thick mane and ripping skin each time the animal struggled. The sheer cruelty of the trap tightened Ethan's chest. He had witnessed the devastation caused by illegal snares before, yet something about this lion, its silent endurance, its refusal to surrender, affected him more profoundly than usual. Maya watched with a mix of fear and awe. Ethan, I've never seen a snare this tight. How did he even survive this long? He fought, Ethan murmured. He carefully reached beneath the lion's shoulder, feeling the tension of the embedded wire. If we don't remove all of it, he won't last another day. The lion's breathing came in hot, uneven bursts. Its ribs shuddered with each inhale. Though its eyes were only half open, Ethan sensed awareness flickering behind them. This animal was still resisting death, still clinging to life. He opened his kit again, pulling out heavier cutters and disinfecting tools used in both emergency medicine and wildlife rescue. Many of the supplies had been donated by international conservation and humanitarian organizations dedicated to protecting endangered species and promoting safe ecotourism. Ethan silently thanked them, knowing without this equipment, the lion's odds would be far worse. "Watch the lionesses," he whispered to Maya. She swallowed and nodded, gripping her radio without daring to speak into it. The two females now stood roughly 20 yards away, positioned on opposite sides like sentinels. Their golden coats melted into the grass, but their eyes never wavered, focused, intense, fully aware of every movement Ethan made. Ethan leaned closer, sliding the cutter beneath the first deeply embedded coil. The wire had twisted in a way that forced him to angle his wrist painfully. When it finally snapped free, the lion jerked and released a hoarse, broken sound that tore through the valley. Maya gasped. The lionesses reacted instantly, stepping forward together, muscles taut beneath their sleek bodies. Maya stumbled backward. Ethan didn't move. He lifted both hands, slowly, palms open. "It's all right," he said softly, even as his pulse spiked. "He's hurting because he wants to live." The lionesses hesitated. Their tails flicked nervously, but they didn't charge. Instead, they watched Ethan more closely now, as if weighing whether to trust him. With that fragile balance intact, Ethan returned to his work. One strand after another snapped beneath the cutters. Each removal exposed deeper damage, raw inflamed flesh, and patches of fur torn away by hours of struggle. The lion trembled with every movement, yet Ethan's hands remained steady. He kept speaking in a low, reassuring tone, even as the tension thickened the air. "You're going to make it," he murmured. "Just a little longer." Maya controlled her breathing, her eyes darting between Ethan's focused hands and the silent lioness's. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered. "It's like they know you're helping." "Maybe they do," Ethan replied quietly, tightening his grip on the cutter. Animals read intention faster than people sometimes. A low grunt escaped the lion, painful but not aggressive. Ethan pressed a clean cloth against the worst wound to slow the bleeding. The lion shuddered beneath the pressure but didn't strike out. Ethan's calm presence seemed to anchor him. Sudden movement in the brush snapped Maya's attention. "Something's moving behind us." Ethan didn't look up. "What is it?" "Small ones," she said after a shaky breath. 3 small animals burst from the bushes and raced across the clearing, fleeing something unseen. For a moment, Maya feared another predator, but the brush went still again. The tension lingered, prickling her skin. Ethan severed the final strand of barbed wire. The tangled metal fell to the ground with a harsh clatter. The lion sagged instantly, his body trembling from the sudden release. Ethan reached for antiseptic, gently spreading it over the torn flesh. The lion flinched but stayed still, as if fully surrendering to Ethan's care. "Easy," Ethan whispered. "You're free now." The lion's eyes opened wider this time, catching the sunlight. For a brief moment, Ethan felt the animal's gaze meet his, not wild, not panicked, but exhausted and strangely aware. As though somewhere beneath the pain, the lion understood. Maya stepped closer. "Should we move back now?" "Not yet," Ethan said. "Let him feel the ground first." The lion tried to rise. His legs shook violently. He managed only a partial lift before collapsing again, dust rising around him. The lioness's growled ears flattening. "They want to help him," Maya whispered in disbelief. Ethan nodded. He had seen animals mourn. He had seen them defend and protect. But this felt different. This felt intentional. This felt like family. The lion gathered himself again, pushing upward with a strained breath. This time he stood, unsteady legs quivering beneath his own weight. Ethan stepped back carefully. Then another step. The lion watched him. Truly watched him. The look sent a chill through Ethan, not sentiment, not imagination, but a deep, primal recognition that crossed the space between them. The moment stretched still and fragile, a narrow bridge between 2 worlds. Then the lion turned and limped toward the waiting lionesses. They greeted him with gentle nudges and soft huffs, forming a protective arc around him. Slowly, the 3 disappeared into the tall grass, leaving only a faint trace where their bodies passed. Ethan finally exhaled the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Maya stared at him, eyes wide. "Ethan, that was incredible. I've never seen a pride act like that." "Neither have I," he said quietly. "But I don't think this is the end." As the grass closed behind the lions, the truth settled deep in Ethan's chest. This encounter wasn't over. It had only just begun. After the pride vanished into the tall grass, the valley fell into an unusual stillness, as if the land itself were pausing to breathe. Ethan stayed kneeling for a long moment, his hand hovering above the twisted remains of the barbed wire he had removed. The jagged metal glinted in the sunlight, its sharp edges a cruel reminder of what the lion had endured. But for now, the immediate danger had passed. Ethan stood slowly, wiping sweat from his forehead. The rush of adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue ebbed away, replaced by a heavy mix of relief and lingering worry. Maya let out a shaky breath beside him. Ethan, I still can't believe what we just witnessed. Those lionesses should have killed us. They could have, he said quietly. But they didn't. They observed. They understood something. You think they knew you were helping him? Ethan's gaze drifted toward the grass where the pride had disappeared. Maybe, he replied. Maybe more than we think. His voice faded as he examined the ground again, tracing the path of the lion's struggle. The soil bore clear signs of resistance, deep claw marks carved into the earth, clumps of fur snagged beneath the wire, and a faint line of blood leading back into the brush. Even wounded and exhausted, the lion had forced himself this far. That alone spoke volumes about his will to live. Maya knelt to help gather the broken coils of wire. "Poachers are getting reckless," she muttered. "We need to report this and sweep the southern fence line. If traps are being set this close to the valley, the whole reserve is at risk." "I know," Ethan replied. This wasn't a simple snare. It was a choke trap. The more the animal fought, the deeper it cut. He lifted a coil darkened with blood. Whoever placed this didn't care what they caught. They just wanted something dead. Maya shook her head, anger flashing across her face. And people still question why conservation programs need funding. Without protection, without anti-poaching patrols, lions like him wouldn't survive. Ethan didn't answer. His thoughts lingered on the lion's final look, the tired yet lucid gaze that had met his with an intensity he couldn't dismiss. That moment, brief as it was, felt like acknowledgement. Not gratitude in a human sense, not emotion shaped by sentiment, but something older and wordless. A recognition of kindness in a world that rarely offered it. As they collected the last strands of wire, Ethan noticed fresh droplets of blood scattered through the grass. Not from the earlier trail. These were newer, brighter. The lion had reopened a deep wound while moving away. "We should follow them," Ethan said softly. Maya stiffened. "Ethan, that's dangerous. The pride is still close." "I won't get too near," he replied. "I just need to be sure he didn't collapse." She hesitated, torn between caution and the urgency in his voice. Finally, she nodded. "All right. But we keep our distance." They moved carefully, tracking crushed grass and scattered blood. The sun climbed higher, warming the air and filling it with the sweet scent of acacia. The wind shifted, carrying distant zebra calls and the rhythmic thudding of a wildebeest herd in motion. Yet beneath the familiar sounds of the reserve, something else lingered. A subtle tension. A sense that the land itself was watching. After several minutes, Ethan lifted a hand, signaling Maya to stop. Ahead, beneath the shade of a thorn tree, the pride had regrouped. Two lionesses, sleek and alert, circled the male, gently nudging him to keep him conscious. The injured lion Zuri, as Ethan had named him, lay on his side, breathing heavily. Each breath lifted his ribs with effort, his body trembling as exhaustion battled his remaining strength. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. "He's fading," Maya whispered. "Not yet," Ethan replied quietly. "He's still holding on." The lionesses noticed them at the edge of the clearing, their heads lifted, eyes narrowing, but they didn't advance. This time they stood watch not against the rangers, but against any threat that might approach their wounded male. "It's like they're allowing us to see," Maya murmured. "Or warning us," Ethan said. "Either way, they're choosing to stay." Zuri attempted to lift his head, managing only a slight shift of his mane. The bandages Ethan had placed were darkened, but the bleeding had slowed. He had stabilized the worst injuries, though the lion still needed rest water and time, things Ethan couldn't safely provide without endangering everyone involved. A low rumble vibrated from Zuri's chest. Not a growl, an acknowledgement. His amber eyes opened and settled on Ethan with startling clarity. A strange calm washed over Ethan as their gazes locked again. There it was. Recognition. Not imagined. Not projected. Something instinctive, primal, and undeniable. Maya whispered, barely audible, "He knows you." Ethan said nothing. He simply absorbed the moment. A wounded king surrounded by his devoted pride offering one last look before surrendering to rest. The larger lioness stepped closer, lowering her head, and releasing a deep, resonant call that echoed through the clearing. The sound was protective, commanding, layered with something Ethan recognized from years of observing lions. Loyalty. This wasn't just a pride, it was a family. The scene carried a quiet majesty Ethan rarely witnessed. No displays of dominance, no roaring. Only gentle contact, careful guidance, and a shared resolve to keep Zuri alive. It was the side of the wild few visitors ever saw. The tenderness of predators toward their own. After a moment, Ethan signaled Maya to retreat. "We shouldn't stay too close," he whispered. "If they feel threatened again, everything could change." Maya nodded and followed him back through the grass. As they left the clearing, Ethan turned for one last look. Zuri lifted his head just enough to watch him go. A silent farewell. For now. But deep in Ethan's chest, he felt it clearly. This was not the end. Not even close. Something had shifted between man and lion that day. Something that would echo across the reserve long after the wire was gone. And somewhere in the savannah where the wind carried stories older than memory, an unseen bond had taken shape. The days that followed settled into a quiet cadence across the Umfosi Reserve. Yet for Ethan Walker, nothing felt truly normal anymore. Each morning he resumed his patrol routes, inspecting fence lines, tracking wildlife movement, filing reports, tied to conservation funding and environmental protection initiatives. Still, his thoughts kept circling back to the injured lion. Zuri. The name had surfaced so easily, as though it had belonged to the lion long before Ethan ever spoke it. He wondered whether the pride had kept him safe, whether his wounds were healing, whether the lionesses still guarded him with the same fierce devotion they had shown during the rescue. Maya noticed the change in him. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" Ethan didn't deny it. If he made it through the first 24 hours, he's stronger than most. And if he didn't, she asked softly. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel as they drove through the heavy, late afternoon heat. "Then I'll believe we did everything we could." They traveled in silence for several minutes, the Land Cruiser jolting along the uneven dirt track. Dust billowed behind them in a warm, golden haze. In the distance, impala grazed across the plains, and a cluster of giraffes stretched their long necks toward the treetops. Despite the beauty surrounding him, a weight lingered in Ethan's chest. He had rescued many animals during his years in the reserve, but something about Zuri's gaze, those weary, aware eyes, had lodged itself in his thoughts in a way he couldn't explain. When they reached a high ridge overlooking the valley, Ethan brought the vehicle to a stop and scanned the terrain. It was routine, yet today it felt like searching. The vantage point offered a sweeping view of the savannah below sunlit grasslands, stretching endlessly dotted with acacia trees and rocky formations. This ridge was often used for monitoring wildlife, particularly predators that roamed wide territories. Maya lifted her binoculars. No signs of poachers so far. For once, that's good news. "Let's hope it lasts," Ethan murmured. "This area is becoming a target. With the global demand for wildlife products, poachers are taking bigger risks. They don't care what they destroy." Maya lowered the binoculars and looked at him. "But we care. And that's what matters." Ethan nodded, appreciating her quiet resolve. Then, as he scanned the rocky horizon again, something shifted just barely. A flicker of movement along the opposite ridge. At first it was only a shape blending with stone. Then it rose tall and unmistakable. A lion. Ethan's breath caught. Maya leaned forward. "Do you see that?" "I do," Ethan said quietly. The figure stood perfectly still, its mane stirring in the warm wind. The distance was great, but there was no mistaking the broad shoulders, the dark mark near the crown of the mane, the posture that balanced power with alert watchfulness. "It's him," Ethan whispered. "Zuri." Maya raised her binoculars again. "He's standing there, watching us. And he looks stronger." Zuri didn't move. He remained on the highest point of the ridge, eyes fixed in their direction. There was no aggression in his stance, no sign of territorial challenge. Instead, it felt intentional, almost protective, as though he were ensuring the rangers were safe before returning his attention to the valley below. Ethan lowered his binoculars slowly, a strange warmth spreading through him. "He remembers." Maya smiled faintly. "Looks like you left an impression." But it didn't end there. Over the next several days, the sightings continued, always from a distance, always from elevated ground. Sometimes Zuri appeared at dawn, a quiet silhouette against the soft morning light. Other times he emerged at dusk, outlined by the fiery glow of sunset. And occasionally he wasn't alone. One evening, as Ethan finished recording wildebeest migration patterns near the river bend, a familiar prickle crept along the back of his neck. He turned slowly. On a rocky ledge above him stood not one lion, but three. Zuri flanked by the same two lionesses who had guarded him during his injury, the pride. They stood silently, golden coats catching the fading light, eyes calm and observant. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was something else, an acknowledgement, as if they were showing him that Zuri had fully rejoined them. Maya instinctively reached for her camera, but Ethan gently covered her hand. "No," he whispered. "Let them be." They watched for several long moments before the pride turned and melted back into the grass, their forms blending seamlessly with the land. Later that night, back at the ranger station, Ethan sat alone beside the outdoor fire pit. Crickets chirped in the grass, and the night breeze carried the earthy scent of the reserve. He replayed the images in his mind, the lions watching from above, calm and united. It stirred something deep within him, a connection he didn't fully understand. He closed his eyes briefly. "Why me, Zuri?" he murmured. "Why follow us?" The fire crackled softly in response, offering no answer. Yet a quiet certainty grew inside him. Zuri's behavior wasn't coincidence. The pride's appearances weren't random. Something was shifting in the wild, something rooted in instinct, memory, and the fragile trust born during the rescue. Before heading inside, Ethan glanced toward the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, Zuri and his pride moved through moonlit grass, watching, listening, guarding. And though Ethan couldn't see them, he felt their presence like a steady shadow. A silent companion he never asked for, but now couldn't imagine the reserve without. This bond, whatever it was becoming, was far from finished. In fact, it was deepening. The dry season crept into Umfosi like a quiet thief, draining moisture from the soil and leaving the grasses brittle beneath the relentless African sun. By late afternoon, heat shimmered across the reserve, carrying the uneasy tension that often came before disaster. Ethan Walker felt it pressing against his skin as he drove toward the western boundary with Maya beside him. They were responding to a report from a tour guide who had spotted smoke rising beyond the hills, never a good sign at this time of year. As they neared the ridge, the smell reached them first. Not the comforting scent of a campfire, but the harsh, acrid bite of burning brush. Ethan slowed, the Land Cruiser, eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. A thin plume of smoke curled upward, darkening at its base, clear evidence of a fresh ignition. Wildfires here could start from something as small as a stray spark, but more often, they followed lightning strikes during dry storms. Whatever the cause, they spread quickly in conditions like these, threatening wildlife and visitors alike. Maya lifted her radio. "Station 1, this is Patrol 3. We have visible smoke in the western sector. No open flames yet, but we're approaching." Static crackled before a clipped voice replied. "Copy that, Patrol 3. Be advised a storm passed through that area overnight, likely lightning-related. Proceed with caution." Ethan steered off the main track, the vehicle bouncing across uneven ground. As they crested the next hill, the source of the smoke came into view. Flames crept through the dry undergrowth, advancing in jagged lines that consumed everything in their path. It wasn't large yet, but the wind was rising. Bad timing, bad luck, and dangerous for anyone caught in its way. "Do we know if any tourists were out hiking here today?" Ethan asked. "Two groups," Maya answered, "but only one has checked back in." The other was led by a trainee guide, Tom Colley. Ethan's stomach tightened. Tom was young, cautious, but still inexperienced, especially when situations spiraled out of control. The thought of him trying to manage visitors amid rising smoke and unpredictable winds made Ethan press harder on the accelerator. "We need to reach them before this worsens," he said. As they pushed deeper into the valley, the wind shifted abruptly. Thick, gray smoke rolled toward them in heavy waves crawling low across the dry grass. The Land Cruiser's headlights sliced through the haze, but visibility dropped fast. Ethan slowed to a near crawl, straining to hear anything. Voices, cries, the frantic movement of animals fleeing danger. The fire crackled somewhere ahead, its echoes bouncing off rocky formations and making it hard to pinpoint its exact position. Then faint but unmistakable, they heard it, a shout. "There," Maya said, pointing toward a cluster of acacia trees. Ethan slammed the brakes and jumped out, running toward the sound. Smoke burned his eyes, blurring the shapes ahead. As he closed the distance, he spotted Tom waving, desperately crouched beside three tourists huddled close to the ground. "They can't breathe," Tom yelled, coughing between words. The wind changed too fast. Ethan nodded and reached for his emergency respirator masks, standard wildfire rescue gear often emphasized in disaster response training. "Put these on," he instructed, fitting them over the tourists' faces. Maya ushered the group toward the cruiser, guiding them away from the thickest smoke. Ethan pulled Tom aside. "Are you injured?" "No." Tom said, his face pale beneath layers of soot. "Just scared. We tried going back the way we came, but then there was this loud crack. Not an animal, not thunder. A tree burning from the inside collapsed right in front of us." Ethan gripped Tom's shoulder. "We move now." The wind surged again, feeding the flames and sending sparks spiraling into the air. Smoke thickened, swallowing the valley in a choking veil. Ethan guided Tom toward the vehicle, but another gust pushed the fire closer, igniting a patch of dry grass that erupted instantly. "Go," Ethan shouted. "Stay low. Run." They sprinted, ducking beneath rolling smoke as heat surged at their backs. When they reached the Land Cruiser, Maya had already loaded the tourists and was yelling for them to get inside. Ethan grabbed the door handle, and then the valley exploded with a sharp cracking sound. He turned just in time to see a massive burning branch snap loose and crash down directly in front of him. The impact sent dust and embers flying. Ethan stumbled backward, losing his footing. His ankle twisted violently beneath him, and he dropped to one knee, clenching his teeth to suppress a cry. Heat washed over him in waves as smoke poured around the fallen branch like a suffocating wall. "Ethan," Maya shouted from inside the vehicle. "Get in." "I can't," he gasped, shielding his face from the sparks. The branch blocked the path, and the fire was spreading too fast. "Get them out," he yelled. "Take Tom and the tourists to safety." Maya's eyes widened. "I'm not leaving you." "Go," Ethan barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get them clear of the smoke." Tom reached for the door. "Ethan," now Ethan shouted. "That's an order." Maya hesitated only a second before slamming the door shut. The engine roared, tires spinning as the vehicle pulled away toward cleaner air. Ethan watched it vanish into the haze, his chest tightening not only from the smoke, but from the realization that he was now alone. The fire crept closer. Heat pressed in from every direction, relentless. Ethan forced himself to crawl toward a slight rise in the ground, desperate to gain even a few yards of distance from the advancing flames. Every breath scorched his lungs. Every movement sent jolts of pain through his injured ankle. He coughed violently, vision blurring. The world shrank into a tunnel of gray smoke and flickering orange light. Somewhere nearby, animals cried out as they fled. Herds stampeded blindly. Birds burst into the air in frantic swarms, their silhouettes swallowed by the smoke-filled sky. Ethan dragged himself forward another few feet, but his strength failed. His lungs screamed for clean air. Firelight danced wildly across his soot-streaked face as the heat closed in. Just when Ethan believed he could no longer draw breath, no longer move, no longer endure, a sound tore through the chaos. A deep, thunderous roar that seemed to shake the ground itself. Ethan lifted his head weakly. Through the churning smoke, a massive outline took shape, broad, powerful, unmistakable. Zuri, the lion he had saved. The lion who remembered. And he was not alone. The roar ripped through the haze like a warning sent from the earth, deep and resonant, the unmistakable call of a fully grown male. Ethan froze where he knelt, his injured ankle pulsing with pain, his lungs burning from the thick, choking air. For a fleeting instant, fear flickered through him. A lion in a wildfire was dangerous enough. A wounded ranger on the ground was an easy target, but then the shape advanced, cutting through drifting embers with calm, deliberate strength. Zuri emerged from the smoke like something out of legend. His mane, once golden, now glowed with streaks of firelit red, making him appear carved from flame itself. Behind him, 2 lionesses flanked his sides, bodies low and ready not to attack, but to clear a way forward. It violated every rule Ethan had ever learned about predator behavior. Lions fled fire. They did not charge into it. They did not approach injured humans. They certainly did not risk their own lives for someone outside their species. But Zuri did. The lion halted a few steps away, amber eyes slicing through the smoke with fierce concentration. For a moment, neither moved. An unnatural stillness settled over the burning valley, as though time itself had paused. Then Zuri released another roar. Not one of threat, but of command. The lionesses responded instantly, circling wide around Ethan, scanning the surroundings with razor-sharp alertness. They're protecting me. Ethan whispered, scarcely believing the words. Zuri stepped closer, lowering his massive body until he stood squarely between Ethan and the advancing flames. His muscles tightened, breathing heavy yet controlled. The lion's presence formed a living barrier blocking the worst of the heat. Instinct had been redirected toward something impossible. Ethan coughed violently, bracing himself on shaking arms. Zuri, you shouldn't be here. You'll get hurt. The lion ignored him. Instead, Zuri turned toward the burning branch that blocked Ethan's escape. With a deep growl, he surged forward, slamming his shoulder into the charred wood. Sparks erupted into the air. The branch shifted, not enough to open the way, but enough to weaken its grip. One lioness joined him, clamping her jaws around a smaller limb and dragging it sideways. The other circled behind Ethan, nudging him gently with her head, urging him forward, urging him to survive. The realization struck Ethan like a blast of heat. They weren't reacting. They were coordinating. They were guarding him the way they would an injured member of their own pride. Ethan dragged himself ahead, as far as his damaged ankle allowed, inching toward the narrow opening Zuri and the lionesses had created. The ground beneath him radiated blistering heat. Each breath tasted of ash, but he pressed on, driven by something deeper than instinct. He trusted them. Zuri braced himself again, forcing the branch aside with a guttural roar. This time the wood cracked under the strain, rolling just enough for Ethan to squeeze through. He collapsed onto his elbows, coughing violently. Smoke blurred his vision, but a rush of cooler air hit his face as the lioness beside him guided him toward a cleaner pocket of wind. She stayed tight at his side, a living shield between him and the fire. "Easy." "I'm trying," Ethan gasped. The ground trembled as Zuri moved closer, his eyes locking onto Ethan with that same impossible recognition Ethan had seen the day he cut him free. A bond forged not by nature, not by survival alone, but by a single act of mercy one Zuri had never forgotten. Behind them, flames climbed the trees with terrifying speed. The fire shifted again as a new gust of wind swept through. Ethan knew they had seconds, perhaps a minute, before the area would be consumed. "Go," he rasped. "Get to safety." But Zuri did not retreat. Instead, the lionesses moved with sudden urgency. One pressed in at Ethan's side. The other positioned herself behind him. Together, they guided him along a narrow animal trail that curved away from the fire line. Ethan crawled, stumbled, limped, but the pride stayed with him, forming a triangle of protection. The smoke thinned slightly as they reached a low dip in the terrain where the wind carried cleaner air. Ethan collapsed once more, this time from sheer exhaustion. His chest heaved as he struggled to breathe. The lionesses stationed themselves on either side, ears, twitching eyes sharp as they scanned for danger. Zuri approached, slowly lowering his head until his face was level with Ethan's. In that moment, there was no ranger and no lion. Only two survivors in a brutal world, bound by something ancient and unspoken. Ethan lifted a trembling hand toward Zuri's mane, not to touch, but as a gesture. You saved my life," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of it. Zuri blinked once. Slow, deliberate. Then his great body shuddered. Ethan's breath caught as Zuri staggered backward, legs failing beneath him. The lion had inhaled far more smoke than Ethan realized. His sides heaved, breaths coming in harsh, ragged bursts. No, stay with me," Ethan pleaded, crawling toward him. "Please, Zuri." Zuri collapsed fully onto his side. The lionesses rushed to him, bodies tense with fear and frustration. One nudged his mane. The other released a low, mournful rumble. Ethan reached Zuri, placing his hand gently against the lion's shoulder. Heat radiated beneath his palm, but the strength was slipping away. The great king of the ridge, the lion who had endured traps, pain, and fire, now lay gasping beneath a smoke-darkened sky. Ethan bowed his head, tears blurring his vision. "You saved me," he whispered. "Now let me help you." But Zuri did not rise. His breaths grew weaker. The wildfire roared behind them, yet the valley suddenly felt unbearably silent. The lionesses trembled, torn between staying with their fallen leader and fleeing the advancing flames. Ethan wrapped both arms around Zuri's massive mane, pulling himself close, as if anchoring them both to the last fragile thread of hope. "You're not dying here," Ethan said through clenched teeth. "Not after everything. Not like this." And in that desperate embrace, man and lion bound together in smoke-choked air, the impossible bond between them reached its deepest point. The king had fallen, but the story was not yet finished. The world around Ethan faded into a blur of heat and smoke as he clutched Zuri's mane, refusing to release his grip. The lion's breaths were shallow, his powerful chest rising only with visible strain. Ethan's own lungs burned, but he forced air into them, determined to remain awake. Behind them, the wildfire crackled with renewed intensity as shifting winds drove the flames closer. The lionesses paced restlessly, releasing low, distressed rumbles that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. Ethan pressed his forehead against Zuri's. "Stay with me," he whispered. "We're getting out of this." But he knew Zuri couldn't stand on his own. Not like this. The fire line advanced rapidly, carrying a wall of blistering heat that made the air shimmer. Ethan tried to pull the lion upward, but his injured ankle gave way, and he collapsed back to the ground. Pain shot through his leg, but he clenched his jaw and crawled toward Zuri again. He no longer cared about the danger. He no longer cared how close the flames were. There was only one truth that mattered. He would not let the lion who had saved his life die alone. Then, cutting through the roar of fire, another sound surged across the valley, a chorus of deep, powerful growls rolling in from multiple directions. Ethan lifted his head, squinting through the smoke. Shapes emerged. First shadows, then faces. More lions. Lionesses from Zuri's pride, followed by two younger males. Their bodies were tense with urgency, eyes blazing as they moved toward the clearing. Ethan's heart lurched. He had expected fear. He had expected danger. Nothing prepared him for what followed. The pride surrounded them, not with hostility, not as a warning, but with purpose. A living ring of muscle and fur formed around Ethan and the fallen lion. Each lion stood shoulder to shoulder, creating a solid barrier, all facing outward toward the fire, as if daring it to advance. The younger males positioned themselves behind Zuri, nudging his back with gentle insistence, urging him to rise. They came, Ethan whispered, barely able to speak. They came for their king. The heat intensified, sparks scattering across the scorched ground. Ethan shielded his face, bracing for the worst. But then something astonishing unfolded. The lionesses began to move, sweeping low to the ground, batting burning debris aside, clearing a wider passage. Their instincts, refined by generations of survival on the savannah, guided them flawlessly. They worked together with eerie coordination, expanding the narrow escape route Zuri had opened earlier. One lioness returned to Ethan's side, pressing firmly against his shoulder. Maya's voice echoed faintly in his memory. "When they want you to move, you'll know." Ethan knew. "You want me to come with you," he whispered. The lioness nudged him again, harder this time. Ethan nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "All right, I'm coming." But Zuri still lay motionless. The largest lioness, the same one who had stood guard during the rescue days before, stepped forward. She placed a massive paw gently over Zuri's mane and released a deep, resonant call that sent a tremor through the ground. Another lioness joined her, then another. Together they nudged, pressed, and supported their fallen leader. Zuri's eyes flickered open. Ethan gasped. "That's it. Come on, don't give up." The lion's body shook as he tried to rise. His legs slid beneath him, but the pride did not retreat. They pressed in closer, bracing his weight with their bodies, lifting him in the only way lions could, with presence, with proximity, with unyielding loyalty. Slowly, inch by inch, Zuri stood. The sight was nothing short of miraculous. A king raised not by strength alone, but by devotion. Ethan felt tears sting his eyes as the impossible became real. Zuri swayed, breathing harsh and uneven, yet remained upright. Then he looked at Ethan. Exhaustion dulled his gaze, but that same ancient recognition still glimmered within it. The largest lioness turned and roared toward the path ahead. The pride responded as one. They began a slow, coordinated retreat, away from the advancing fire, guiding their weakened leader and the injured man through the passage they had cleared. Ethan limped beside them, leaning on a sturdy branch for support. The pride shifted just enough to draw him into their formation, surrounding him completely, as if he belonged among them. It was the most surreal procession Ethan had ever witnessed. Man and lions moving together in silent unity, bound by survival. As they reached lower ground, the smoke thinned. The heat eased. The flames receded behind them. Ethan collapsed to one knee, coughing violently. Zuri lowered himself as well, chest heaving, but the air here was cooler, safer. "Ethan!" The voice reached him before the figures did. Maya and several rangers ran down the slope, relief etched across their faces. They reached him quickly, helping him upright, as he pointed weakly toward the pride still gathered around Zuri. The rangers stopped short, stunned. Maya covered her mouth. "My God," she whispered. "They're protecting him." "No," Ethan rasped. "They were protecting both of us." The pride did not flee. They did not snarl or bare their teeth. They stood silently encircling their recovering leader. For long seconds, humans and lions faced one another, not as enemies, not as threats, but as two worlds briefly joined by something beyond explanation. Then in perfect harmony, the pride stepped aside. They allowed the rangers to lift Ethan onto a stretcher. They allowed Zuri to rest undisturbed. And before disappearing into the tall grass, the largest lioness turned and fixed Ethan with one final look. Calm, aware, remembering. A look that said, "We know, we remember." Zuri recovered over the following weeks under careful supervision. When he was strong enough, he was released back into the eastern wild, where his pride welcomed him with powerful roars that echoed across the valley. Ethan watched from a respectful distance, leaning on his crutch, smiling despite the pain in his ankle. When Zuri reached the ridge, he turned back once, just once, to find Ethan among the rangers. That silent exchange sealed the bond into legend. Months passed. Yet rangers and visitors began sharing the same quiet observation. Whenever Ethan patrolled the reserve, a lion could often be seen in the distance, standing watch from the hilltops. A golden silhouette against the sky. Zuri, the guardian who remembered kindness, the king who chose to protect a man, and the pride who followed him, rewriting everything the world believed about the divide between humans and the wild. As Ethan would tell visitors years later, it was the most unbelievable chapter of his life, and every word of it was true. If this story moved you even a little, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a simple 0 or 1 in the comments, anything at all, just so I know you're here with me, sharing these extraordinary moments between people and the wild. And if you'd like to hear more true, soul-stirring animal stories like this, make sure to subscribe and stay with the channel. Many unforgettable journeys still await. I'd be honored to tell them.